Hi, and welcome back to Revenge Fire. My name is Claire Harmon. I'm 29, a registered nurse working 3 12-hour shifts a week at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and the kind of person who keeps a color-coded spreadsheet for her monthly budget. Not because I love spreadsheets, but because I have a 7-year-old daughter named Lily who has type 1 diabetes, and when your kid's insulin costs what it does, you learn very quickly that every dollar has a job. So, when my sister called me last October, saying her apartment had flooded and she needed a place to stay, I said yes without hesitating. That's what you do. You say yes, you clear out the guest room, you tell yourself it's temporary, she said 2 weeks, maybe 3. Just until the insurance sorted out the apartment. That was the last honest thing she told me for a long time. I want to be clear about something before I tell you the rest of this. I love my sister. Or I loved who I thought she was. I loved the version of her that existed before she moved her husband and her 17-year-old son into my house and collectively decided that because I had a steady paycheck and a stable home, everything in it was theirs to use. The flooding was real. The 2-week timeline was not. And neither was anything she said the night I found out she had opened 3 credit cards in my name without asking me and run up $11,200 in charges I never made. She looked me dead in the face and said, "Claire, it's not like you're struggling." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat very still at my kitchen table for about 4 seconds, and then I got up, walked to my bedroom, and closed the door quietly behind me. Because I knew if I stayed in that room one more moment, I was going to say something I could never take back. And I needed to think clearly. I needed to be smart about this. Because Lily was asleep down the hall, and she didn't need to wake up to her mother falling apart. She needed her mother to fix it. Let me back up to the beginning, because you need to understand how we got there. My sister is 32. Her husband hasn't held a steady job in about 2 years, something that always gets explained away as the market being rough or him being overqualified or his last boss being impossible. Their son is 17, and somewhere between charming and infuriating, depending on the day. When they showed up in October with 3 carloads of stuff and a golden retriever I hadn't been warned about, I told myself it was fine. My 2-bedroom apartment was tight, but we would manage. I put Lily in my room with me, gave them the guest room, and let my nephew have the pullout in the living room. The first week was fine. Genuinely. My sister cooked twice, and it was good. My brother-in-law talked about applying to a project management firm downtown. My nephew did his homework at the kitchen table and said please and thank you. I let myself think maybe this was going to work out. By week 3, the cooking had stopped. The applications apparently had too. My nephew's homework had been replaced by a gaming setup he'd somehow acquired that now occupied most of the living room coffee table. The golden retriever had chewed through one of Lily's stuffed animals, and nobody apologized. And the groceries I bought on Sunday were gone by Wednesday, even though I'd planned them to last the week. I work nights sometimes, 12 hours, on my feet, managing patients, charting, running on coffee and adrenaline. I come home at 7 in the morning, and there have been days I open my fridge to find nothing left but condiments and a half-empty gallon of milk. I'd stand there in my scrubs, too tired to be angry, eat whatever I could find, and sleep for 6 hours before picking Lily up from school. I stopped saying anything about the groceries because every time I did, my sister would get this wounded look on her face and say something about how stressed they all were and how she didn't realize I was keeping score. I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping the lights on. I was paying the power bill, which had jumped because someone was running a space heater in the guest room around the clock. I was covering the internet, which had slowed to a crawl because my nephew was streaming something on every device he owned at all hours. I was filling the gas tank because my brother-in-law needed to borrow my car 3 times a week for job interviews that never seemed to produce a callback. And through all of it, I told myself, temporary. This is temporary. They're family. Lily never complained. That's the thing about kids with chronic illness, they become very good at reading the mood of a room and not adding to the weight. She would curl up next to me in bed and ask me to read to her, and sometimes I'd fall asleep in the middle of the chapter and wake up to find she'd tucked my hand under the blanket and turned off the lamp herself. 7 years old and already taking care of me. That's the part I couldn't forgive. Not just what was done to my credit and my money, but what she watched me absorb without standing up for myself. What I modeled for her without meaning to. I found out about the credit cards on a Tuesday night in January. I'd been trying to refinance my car, nothing dramatic, just wanted to lower the interest rate, clean up the monthly budget a little. The loan officer at my credit union called and said there was a flag on my credit report, a few accounts she didn't recognize. She wanted to confirm before moving forward. I told her I'd look into it and call her back. I pulled up my credit report that night after Lily went to bed. There were 3 store credit accounts I had never opened. One from a home goods chain, one from an electronics retailer, one from a clothing brand I had never once shopped at in my life. All 3 had been opened within the past 4 months. All 3 had balances. Combined, the number was $11,247. My hands went cold. I sat there reading the account numbers, the opening dates, the billing addresses. The billing address on all 3 was my apartment. My apartment, opened from my address, using my social security number, my date of birth, my information. The information my sister had access to because 8 years ago when our mother was sick, I had added her to a financial power of attorney document and she had all my identifying details. I thought about the home goods chain first. My sister had come home with a new set of bedding about 6 weeks after they moved in, told me she found it on sale. I remember thinking it looked expensive for a sale. I thought about the electronics retailer. My nephew had a new monitor on his gaming setup. Peripherals I hadn't seen him arrive with. I thought about the clothing brand. My sister had worn a coat to church in December, a long camel-colored coat I'd admired without saying anything, because I didn't want to make her feel bad about having nicer things than me while living in my home. I sat with the credit report on my screen until the numbers blurred. Then I went to the living room where she was watching something on my television, and I sat down across from her, and I said, calmly, that I needed her to explain the credit accounts. She went very still. Not the stillness of someone confused. The stillness of someone caught. She said she'd been going to tell me. She said she'd been planning to pay them off before I ever noticed. She said she didn't think it would matter because I had good credit, and they were small purchases, things they needed, things that were hard to buy when you have no income, and a kid, and you're trying to keep up appearances enough to actually get back on your feet. She said the word sorry 3 times in the first 60 seconds, which is usually the sign that someone is sorry they got caught and not sorry for what they did. And then, when I didn't say anything, and just kept looking at her, she crossed her arms and said it. Claire, it's not like you're struggling. I've replayed that sentence 100 times since then. Not like you're struggling, as though the absence of visible desperation means you have reserves to be taken from. As though working 3 12-hour shifts so you can afford your daughter's insulin and keep a roof over her head and build the tiniest possible cushion against disaster is the same as having unlimited resources that other people are welcome to quietly tap. As though she had done me a favor by choosing me specifically because she figured I could absorb it. I got up, I said goodnight. I closed my bedroom door. And then I started working. I pulled up every credit account, every statement, every transaction. I took screenshots of everything. I made a document with dates, amounts, merchant names, and notes about items I had physically seen in the apartment that corresponded to the charges. The bedding, the monitor, the coat, a kitchen appliance I'd assumed they brought with them, a pair of boots my nephew had started wearing in November. I cross-referenced the opening dates of the accounts against my own records, confirmed that I had been at work on the nights the online applications had been submitted. I was building a file. Not because I knew exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but because I knew whatever I decided, I needed it to be airtight. By 1 in the morning, I had contacted all 3 creditors, reported the accounts as fraudulent, and initiated dispute claims. I told each of them that I had not authorized the opening of these accounts, that I had a family member with access to my personal information, and that I had documentation. They gave me case numbers. They told me investigations would begin within 1 to 3 business days. They told me to file a police report. I sat with that last part for a moment. A police report about my sister. I filed it anyway. Online, through the Columbus PD identity theft portal, filled out every field, uploaded the screenshots, submitted it at 1:47 inches the morning, got a confirmation number, sat there looking at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my credit monitoring app and put a freeze on all 3 bureaus. Nobody was opening anything new in my name tonight or any other night. In the morning, Lily woke me up at 6:30 by touching my shoulder very gently and asking if she could have her cereal. I made her breakfast, checked her blood sugar, packed her bag, and drove her to school. On the way back, I stopped for coffee and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before going inside to face whatever was about to happen. My sister was in the kitchen when I walked in. My brother-in-law was there too, poured into a chair at my table with his phone, which was the position he occupied approximately 18 hours a day. My nephew was still asleep. The golden retriever was eating something off the floor that I hoped was food. My sister looked at me like she'd been waiting. "We need to talk," she said. "I know," I said. I set my coffee down and sat across from her. My brother-in-law didn't look up from his phone, which told me she'd already told him, or he already knew. She started with an explanation that turned into a justification, that turned into an accusation. They'd been drowning. She hadn't known what else to do. She'd meant to tell me. She'd planned to pay it back before the statements came. She wasn't a bad person. She was a desperate person, and there was a difference, and she wished I could see that. And yes, maybe she should have asked, but the way I managed my money and kept everything so locked down and organized, she knew I'd say no, and she couldn't hear no right now, and she thought I'd understand once things turned around. Then she said it again, a different version of the same sentence. "You have a good job, Claire. You're not in the position we're in." My brother-in-law finally looked up from his phone long enough to nod. I said, "Lily's insulin is $400 a month out of pocket after insurance. Her last endo appointment was $300. Her continuous glucose monitor supplies run me another $150. I have an emergency fund I've been building for 2 years for the day her pump fails or she ends up in the hospital, and $11,000 of it just walked out the door in a coat I admired without knowing I paid for it." She opened her mouth. I said, "Let me finish." And I told her everything I'd done the night before. The disputes, the freeze, the report. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. The kind that happens when someone realizes the situation they thought they controlled has entirely left their hands. My brother-in-law set his phone face down on the table for the first time all morning. My sister said, very quietly, "You filed a police report." I said, "I did." She said, "On your own family." I said, "On the person who opened 3 credit cards in my name without my knowledge. The fact that we share parents doesn't change what that is." She started to cry. Real tears, I think. She is not a cruel person, and I don't think she ever believed she was doing something that would end this way. I think she had convinced herself it was a gray area. Borrowing without asking, something that could be quietly resolved before anyone's life fell apart. I think she had underestimated me in a specific and common way, the way people underestimate someone who has been patient and generous, as though patience and generosity are the same as having no limit. I handed her a box of tissues because I'm a nurse and handing people tissues is reflexive at this point, and then I told her we needed to talk about what happened next. I had written it down. I do better when I write things down. I slid the paper across the table. The accounts were disputed and frozen. The investigation was open. Whatever happened with the creditors was now between them and the law and the evidence I'd provided. I was not going to intervene to make that easier or harder. It was out of my hands and in theirs. That was point 1. Point 2. They had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I had researched transitional housing resources, 2 apartment complexes with month-to-month availability, and a nonprofit that helped families in financial transition find stable rental arrangements. The links were at the bottom of the page. I was not leaving them in the street. I was giving them a real timeline with real resources. But they were leaving. Point 3. Between now and then, my car was not available to borrow. My accounts, my cards, my login information, my mail were not to be touched. If any further unauthorized use was discovered, I would update the report. Point 4. I had spoken to my hospital's employee assistance program that morning before coming home. They had a counselor I was going to start seeing. I was not okay. I was handling it, but I was not okay, and I was allowed to say that. My sister read the paper slowly. My brother-in-law read it over her shoulder. Then, my brother-in-law, who had contributed nothing to the conversation except a nod and a phone put face down. cleared his throat, and said that 30 days wasn't much time and that the housing market was brutal and maybe I could think about extending it to 60, considering everything they were dealing with. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "The 30 days starts today." My nephew came out of the living room around noon, oblivious in the way 17-year-olds can be, and asked what was for lunch. My sister told him to make himself something. He looked at her face, then at my face, then at the golden retriever, and quietly went to the kitchen and made a sandwich without saying another word. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from school and took her to the park even though it was cold, because I needed to be somewhere outside, and so did she. She ran around with her jacket half-zipped and her cheeks red, and when she came back to the bench where I was sitting, she climbed up next to me and leaned against my arm and asked if everything was okay. I told her that grown-up stuff was happening but that I was handling it, and she didn't need to worry. She said okay. Then she said, "Mom, you seem like you haven't been sleeping good." 7 years old. I told her I was going to sleep much better soon. The 30 days were not easy. My sister oscillated between remorse and resentment depending on the hour. Some mornings she'd be up early making coffee and apologizing again. Softer this time, more specific, acknowledging actual things rather than just the general fact of being caught. Other days she'd move through the apartment like she was the one who had been wronged, sighing loudly, muttering to my brother-in-law just below the range where I was supposed to be able to hear. My brother-in-law applied for 2 jobs in the first week, which was more than he'd applied for in the previous 3 months combined. I will give him that. My nephew, who had been the most invisible participant in all of this, came to me on a Saturday morning while everyone else was still in bed and sat at the kitchen table and said he was sorry. Not for anything specific, because I don't think he knew the full scope of what his parents had done. Just sorry that things had gotten like this. Sorry that Lily had to share a room with me. Sorry the dog ate her stuffed animal. He was a kid, and he hadn't chosen any of it, and I told him that, and I meant it. The creditors moved faster than I expected. 2 of the 3 accounts were cleared within 3 weeks, removed from my credit report entirely. The third took a bit longer but was resolved before the 30 days ended. I didn't get a check. That's not how fraud disputes work. The debt was erased, not refunded. The money my sister and her family had spent was gone. But the liability was gone too. And my credit score, which had dropped almost 90 points, began to climb back toward where it belonged. The police report resulted in a call from a detective about 2 weeks in. He asked me some questions, confirmed the documentation I'd uploaded, and told me that given the family relationship and the civil nature of most of what had occurred, it was unlikely to proceed to criminal charges unless I wanted to push it. He said the report would remain on file. I told him I understood. I wasn't trying to send my sister to jail. I was trying to make sure I had documentation if she ever tried to say none of this happened. On day 26, my sister told me they'd found a 2-bedroom in a complex about 15 minutes away. First month, last month, and deposit had been cobbled together from a combination of my brother-in-law's new job. He'd taken a position at a logistics company, a level below what he'd been before, but a job and a loan from our parents, who knew some version of the story. Not the full version. A version. The morning they loaded the last of their things into a rented van, my sister stood in my doorway for a long time. She had dark circles under her eyes and she looked like she'd aged a little since October, and I imagine I did too. She said she didn't know how to make this right. I told her I didn't either. Not yet. She asked if we were going to be okay. I told her I needed time to find out. She nodded. She hugged me once, quickly, and I let her. Then she walked out to the van, and they drove away. And the golden retriever's paw prints were still on my kitchen floor, and Lily's pull-out couch was still folded in the living room corner, where it had been since October, and I stood in my own hallway in my own apartment and took a breath that felt like the first real one in months. That weekend, I moved Lily back into her room. We made a whole event of it. She picked out new fairy lights she'd been wanting and I strung them around her window. We rearranged her bookshelf. She made a sign with her name on it in glitter marker and taped it to her door. She was so happy she was almost vibrating with it. She kept running back and forth between her room and the kitchen asking me to come see how it looked, as if I hadn't just been in there 30 seconds ago. That night, after she was asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my banking app and my credit report and my budget spreadsheet, the color-coded one, and I started to rebuild. I want to be honest with you about where things stand, because I think the clean endings are often a lie. My sister and I talk sometimes. Short conversations. Careful ones. She is paying back a small amount each month from my brother-in-law's paycheck, not because the law requires her to the debt was discharged, but because I told her that if she wanted any version of a relationship with me and with Lily, the gesture had to be real. Not the full amount, not fast, just consistent. Just proof that she understood what she took and was willing to make it mean something. Some months the payment comes. Some months it's late. I don't chase it anymore. My nephew texts me occasionally. Sent Lily a birthday card with a $15 gift card inside, which I thought was sweet and told him so. He's applying to community college. I hope he gets in. The car refinancing went through. The interest rate is almost 2 points lower. Over the life of the loan, that's real money back in Lily's direction. The insulin situation is what it always has been. I work my shifts, I count my budget, I keep the emergency fund growing. Last month I hit a number in that fund that made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like the floor under us was real. There is something people say when you describe a situation like this. Something I heard from a few people once the story got out to various corners of the family. They say you were harsh. They say you could have handled it quietly, internally, without the police report, without the freeze, without the 30-day notice. They say it's your sister, and family forgives family. And there are ways to work things out that don't involve formal documentation and hard deadlines. I have thought about this carefully. Here is what I know. My sister did not take from someone who could absorb it. She took from someone who made it look like she could absorb it, which is different. She mistook composure for surplus. She confused stability for elasticity. She saw a woman who managed her money carefully and worked hard and never complained loudly, and she read that as permission. It was not permission. And if I had handled it quietly, no report, no disputes, no 30-day notice, just a hard conversation, and an apology, and a vague promise to pay it back slowly, Lily's emergency fund would still have a 5-figure hole in it. My credit would still be damaged, and we would still be crowded into this apartment, learning to step around people who had decided my resources were communal property. I chose my daughter over the discomfort of setting limits. I chose her future over the short-term peace of keeping everyone comfortable at her expense. I would make that choice again, without hesitation, not because I stopped loving my sister, but because love and unlimited access are not the same thing, and the most important thing I can teach Lily is that taking care of yourself is not selfishness. It is the foundation that allows you to take care of everyone else. If you are listening to this, and you have let someone reframe your stability as their resource, your patience as permission, your silence as consent, this is your moment to hear it, said plainly. You are allowed to close the account. You are allowed to change the password. You are allowed to hand someone a piece of paper with a deadline and mean every word on it. You don't have to be cruel to be clear. You just have to be done pretending the cost isn't real.